3 weeks after my husband James passed away, the flowers from his funeral were still fading at the cemetery when my daughter Clara dropped a bombshell that turned my world upside down. I'm Ellen Harper, and I'm grateful you're here to hear my story. Stick with me until the end, and please share the city you're reading from. I'd love to know how far this tale reaches. I was standing in the kitchen of our old family home, the same place where I'd cooked countless dinners over the years, when Clara walked in. At 42, she had her father's sharp cheekbones, but none of his kindness. Her face carried that look, the one that said she'd already made up her mind and my opinion didn't matter. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, setting her sleek leather purse on the counter with a deliberate thud. I was still in the black dress I'd worn to James's graveside, the weight of 45 years of marriage heavy on my shoulders. My hands shook as I reached for the coffee maker. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You living here, in my house?" Clara replied, her tone clipped, like she was closing a business deal. "Dad left everything to me, remember? And I can't keep footing the bill for you." The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the tile floor. Dark liquid pooled around the broken pieces, mirroring the way my life felt like it was coming apart. "Clara, it's only been 3 weeks since your father." My voice cracked. "I know," she said, not even glancing at the mess. "But life moves on, Mom. I've got my own kids, my own expenses." I knelt to pick up the shards, my 68-year-old knees creaking in protest. "I get Social Security," I said. "It's not much, $800 a month, but I can help out." Clara's laugh was sharp, humorless. "That doesn't even cover the electric bill, but don't worry, I've got a plan." I paused, looking up at the daughter I'd cradled through fevers and nightmares, the little girl who once clung to me during storms. "What kind of plan?" She pulled out her phone, scrolling with purpose. "A job, personal care assistant. The pay's great." She showed me a listing for a live-in caregiver for a wealthy man needing round-the-clock help. "You were a nurse before you married Dad. It's perfect." My stomach twisted. "Clara, I haven't been a nurse in over 40 years. Things have changed. I wouldn't even know where to start." "It's not medical stuff, Mom. It's just helping with daily tasks, being a companion. You can handle that." She was already typing a message. "I set up an interview for you tomorrow." I stood slowly, shards of the broken mug still biting into my hand. "And if I don't get the job?" Clara's eyes met mine, cold and resolute. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live, Mom. I'm sorry, but I can't keep supporting you." The morning after Clara's ultimatum, I stood outside a mansion that looked like it belonged in a Hollywood film. The driveway stretched longer than the street I'd grown up on, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. My hands trembled as I pressed the doorbell, my mind racing with doubts. At 68, I was interviewing for a job I wasn't sure I could handle, all because my own daughter had pushed me out. How had my life come to this? A woman in her 50s, with a stern face and neatly pinned hair, opened the door. "Mrs. Harper, I'm Margaret, Mr. Carter's house manager. Please, come in." The interior was breathtaking. Polished hardwood floors, a chandelier that sparkled like a constellation, and paintings that screamed wealth. As Margaret led me through corridors adorned with family portraits, I felt like an intruder in a world I didn't belong to. "Mr. Carter needs help with daily tasks," she explained, her voice crisp. "He's been paralyzed from the waist down since a car accident 6 years ago. The job includes room and board, plus a generous salary. But I'll warn you, he's particular. We've gone through 15 assistants in the last 18 months." My stomach sank. 15 assistants? What was I walking into? We paused outside a set of heavy oak doors. Margaret's eyes softened slightly. "He can be challenging, but he's fair. Ready?" She opened the doors to a sprawling study, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto manicured gardens. In a wheelchair by the window sat a man with silver hair and a face that carried the weight of a life well lived. His features were striking, though time had etched lines around his eyes. "Mr. Carter, this is Ellen Harper, the candidate we discussed," Margaret said. He turned his wheelchair toward me, and a strange sensation washed over me, like a half-remembered dream. His eyes were a piercing gray, the kind that held stories you couldn't quite read. When our gazes locked, something flickered across his face. Surprise maybe, or recognition. I couldn't tell. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice deep and refined, with a trace of something familiar that sent a shiver down my spine. "Please, sit." I eased into the chair across from him, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. His gaze stayed on me, intense and searching. "Margaret says you were a nurse," he said, his tone curious but guarded. "Before you married?" "Yes, sir," I replied, steadier than I felt. "A long time ago. And your husband passed recently." It wasn't a question. His eyes flicked to the simple gold band I still wore, James's ring. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said, glancing at my hands. "It's been hard." When I looked up, Edward was still watching me, his expression almost urgent. "Have we met before, Mrs. Harper? There's something about you that feels familiar." My breath caught, a chill running through me. I forced a polite smile. "I don't think so, Mr. Carter. I'd remember." But even as I said it, a spark of doubt flickered in my mind. There was something about him, the way his head tilted slightly, the curve of his jaw, that stirred a memory I couldn't place. My hands trembled in my lap. "Perhaps," he murmured, but his eyes said he wasn't convinced. "Tell me, why do you want this job?" The truth was raw. Clara had cast me out. I had nowhere to go, and at 68, I was too tired to start over. But I couldn't say that. Instead, I met his gaze. "I've always believed in helping people. It's who I am." Something in his face softened, like a wall starting to crumble. "And you're not afraid of a challenge?" I thought of Clara's cold stare as I cleaned up the shattered mug, of sleeping in the spare room of my own home because she'd claimed the master bedroom. "No, sir," I said firmly. "I'm not afraid." Edward nodded slowly. "Margaret, could you give us a moment?" After Margaret left, closing the doors with a soft click, Edward wheeled closer. "Mrs. Harper, I'll be blunt. I'm not an easy man to work for. I'm particular, I have high standards, and I don't tolerate incompetence. But if you take this job, you'll be treated with respect and paid well, very well." He named a salary that made my head spin, more than James had ever earned in a year. "But I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't pry into my life or treat me like I'm helpless. Can you be that person?" I looked into those gray eyes, and that strange flutter of recognition hit me again. "Yes, Mr. Carter," I said. "I can." He extended his hand, and when our fingers touched, a spark shot through me, not static, but something deeper, like a memory waking up. "Welcome to my home, Ellen," he said, his voice soft, almost tender. The way he said my name made my heart skip a beat. I pulled my hand back quickly, scolding myself. I was a widow, a grandmother. I had no business feeling anything for this man. As Margaret showed me to my room that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just veered onto an unfamiliar path. The way Edward Carter said my name, soft and almost wistful, made me wonder if I was on the verge of uncovering a secret I'd buried long ago. My first week at the Carter mansion felt like stepping into a gilded cage. The room Margaret assigned me was larger than the apartment I'd shared with James, with a plush sitting area and a bathroom that gleamed like a five-star hotel. But every morning, I woke to the weight of my new reality. At 68, I was little more than a live-in servant. Edward was exactly as Margaret had warned, demanding and precise. His morning tea had to be served at 7:10 sharp, not a minute later. His books and newspapers were to be arranged just so, and his medication schedule was non-negotiable. A single mistake earned a sharp remark, his voice cutting like a winter wind. But in the quiet moments between his orders, I'd catch him watching me with that same intense look from our first meeting, as if I were a puzzle he was desperate to solve. "Ellen," he said one morning as I set down his breakfast tray, carefully slicing an orange. "That's an unusual name. Family name?" I paused, the knife hovering. "My great-aunt's," I said. "She was from the Midwest." "Midwest?" he repeated, his tone thoughtful. "Where did you grow up?" "Here and there," I said, keeping my voice even. My hands shook slightly as I set the orange slices on the plate. My dad's job kept us moving. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. We moved to escape my father's debts, his late-night card games, his broken promises. Some memories were better left buried. That afternoon, while Edward rested, I unpacked the few boxes Clara had let me take from the house. Clothes, a handful of books, a small jewelry case. At the bottom of the last box, wrapped in old tissue paper, was something I'd nearly forgotten: my photo albums. I'd grabbed them absent-mindedly after James's funeral, flipping through them during those lonely nights when grief kept me awake. Now, sitting in the soft light by my bedroom window, I opened them with trembling hands. The first album held memories of my life with James: our wedding, Clara as a baby, road trips to the coast. I set it aside and reached for the older one, its brown leather cover worn and cracked. These were photos from before James, before motherhood, before the careful life I'd built. The early pages were safe: high school graduation, nursing school friends, my parents smiling in faded Polaroids. But as I turned the pages, my breath quickened. On page 10, the world tilted. There I was, 20 years old, in a blue sundress I'd made myself, my dark hair tied back with a scarf. I was laughing, head thrown back, caught mid-joy. Beside me, his arm around my waist, was a young man with dark hair and striking gray eyes, his smile bright enough to light up the night. Eddie Carter. My hand shook so violently, I nearly dropped the album. Eddie, not Edward. Eddie, who loved late-night drives and strawberry milkshakes, who promised me forever before vanishing from my life. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred, trying to reconcile the vibrant young man in the picture with the reserved, silver-haired man downstairs. The same sharp cheekbones, the same piercing eyes, but the warmth I remembered was gone, replaced by a guarded bitterness. What had turned my Eddie into this Edward Carter? I turned the page, my fingers unsteady. More photos: Eddie and me at a summer carnival, sharing a snow cone. Him spinning me around in my tiny apartment while the neighbor downstairs pounded on the ceiling. Us by a riverbank, my head on his shoulder, both of us believing love could outlast anything. The final photo was from the day he left, standing on a bus station platform, his duffel bag at his feet. The final photo in the album was taken the morning Eddie left. We stood on a bus station platform, his duffel bag at his feet, the air heavy with goodbyes. I was crying, my face buried in his hands as he cupped my cheeks, his gray eyes fierce with determination. "I'm going to make something of myself, Ellen," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll build a future for us, and I'll be back in 2 years to give you everything you deserve. Will you wait for me?" I'd promised I would, my heart breaking but full of hope. God help me, I meant it. But 2 years stretched into 3, then 4. His letters, once frequent and full of dreams, grew sporadic, then stopped. Whispers reached me that Eddie had struck it rich in real estate. But by then I'd met James, kind, dependable James, who loved me without needing to chase glory. I married James 6 months before a letter from Eddie arrived, one I couldn't bear to open until it was too late. Tucked behind that last photo was the letter, its edges worn from years of hiding. I pulled it out with shaking fingers, though I knew every word by heart. "My dearest Ellen," it began in his bold, slanted handwriting. "I've done it, everything I promised and more. I'm coming home next month to start our life together. I've bought a house, our house, and I can't wait to make you my wife. All my love, all my dreams, all my tomorrows are yours. Forever, Eddie." The letter was dated 3 weeks after my wedding to James. I pressed it to my chest, tears streaming down my face. All these years I'd told myself Eddie had forgotten me, that his promises were just a young man's dreams. But he'd kept his word. He'd come back. Only I was already someone else's wife. A soft knock on my door startled me. I shoved the album and letter under my pillow, wiping my eyes quickly. "Come in," I called, my voice unsteady. Margaret entered, her face etched with concern. "Mrs. Harper, Mr. Carter's asking for you. He seems restless." I smoothed my hair and followed her downstairs, my heart pounding. Had Edward remembered? Was that why he kept watching me like I was a ghost? In his study, he sat by the window, staring at the rose garden. When he heard my footsteps, he turned his wheelchair, and I saw something new in his face, not the usual guarded control, but something raw, almost fragile. "Ellen," he said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." I clasped my hands to hide their trembling. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Have you ever been to Fairview?" It's a small town, about an hour's drive from here. My breath caught. Fairview was where I'd grown up, where I'd met Eddie, where I'd fallen in love under a summer sky. I'm not sure, I lied, but my voice wavered. Edward's gray eyes studied me, sharp and unrelenting. There was a diner there, Sally's, I think, and a pond where kids used to hang out on weekends. The color drained from my face. Sally's Diner, where Eddie bought me strawberry milkshakes and made me laugh until my sides ached. The pond where he'd kissed me under a blanket of stars. Mr. Carter, maybe you're thinking of someone else. I said, but his eyes told me he wasn't fooled. Perhaps, he said, his voice low, but his gaze held mine. As I turned to leave, he whispered, "Blue dress. You always looked radiant in blue." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eddie's young face in those photos, heard his voice promising to return. Downstairs, the man he'd become was likely awake too, piecing together the same memories tearing me apart. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The truth was eating me alive, and Eddie, was remembering more each day. Better to face it now than let it destroy us slowly. I found him in the sunroom, reading the morning paper, sunlight catching the silver in his hair. For a moment, I saw both versions of him, the dreamer I'd loved and the solitary man he'd become. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," I said, setting his tea down with steady hands. "Ellen," he said, looking up, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Did you sleep?" "No," I admitted. "Did you?" A faint smile touched his lips. "No." I kept thinking about blue dresses and strawberry milkshakes at Sally's. My breath hitched. There was no use denying it. "The milkshakes were too sweet," I said. "You always told me to get chocolate, but I was stubborn." Edward closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they shimmered with unshed tears. "Ellen Marie Dawson, you wore your great-aunt's pendant and had a scar on your right ankle from a roller skating fall when you were 9. I gave you a ring, a thin silver band, and promised I'd replace it with something grander one day. I still have it." I touched my throat, where that pendant once hung. "You've kept it all these years?" His voice was a whisper. 47 years. We stared at each other, the distance between us not just the space from his wheelchair to my chair, but decades of different paths, choices, and loves. "Why didn't you tell me it was you?" he asked. I sank into the chair across from him, feeling every one of my 68 years. "I was afraid. I'm not the girl you loved anymore, and you're not the boy I knew." Edward nodded slowly. "When I came back and learned you'd married James Harper, I wanted to hate you. I told myself you never loved me, that you'd found someone better." "That's not true," I said, my voice sharp with emotion. "I waited, Eddie. I waited until I couldn't anymore. Your letters stopped, and I wiped away a tear. I thought you'd forgotten me." "I never stopped writing," he said quietly. "My partners convinced me a small-town girl would hold me back. They hid your letters, told me you'd moved on. By the time I realized their lies, you were married." The betrayal hit like a punch. All those years of feeling abandoned. "And he'd been trying to reach me. I hired someone to keep tabs on you," Edward said, his voice heavy. "I know it sounds wrong, but I had to know you were okay. When Clara was born, when you bought that house on Oak Street, when James got sick." I stared at Edward, stunned. "You've been watching me for 47 years? From a distance?" "I never reached out, never tried to disrupt your life," he said, his voice low. "I just needed to know you were okay." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands trembling as he opened it. Inside was the silver ring I'd given back to him the day before my wedding to James. Tears streaming down my face as I chose a life without Eddie's promises. "You kept it," I whispered, my throat tight. "I kept everything," he said, his eyes fixed on the ring. "Every photo, every note you sent me, every memory of us. I never married, Ellen. I told myself it was because I was too busy building my empire. But the truth was simpler. No one else was you." His words settled over me like a heavy fog, carrying the weight of 47 years of solitude, of walls built around a heart that never stopped loving me. "Eddie, I faltered, unsure how to respond. "How do you apologize for a lifetime apart when neither of us chose it?" "I don't blame you," he said quickly. "You made the right choice. James was a good man. He loved you the way you deserved, and he was there when I wasn't. I've made peace with that." Have you? I asked softly, because the man I've been working for these past weeks doesn't seem at peace with anything. Edward's jaw tightened, his eyes clouding. The accident changed me. 6 years ago. I still clung to the hope that maybe, somehow, we'd find each other again, that there could be a second chance. Then I woke up in a hospital bed, paralyzed from the waist down, and I realized how foolish I'd been. What could I offer you now? A broken man in a wheelchair? Stop, I said, standing abruptly, anger flaring in my chest. Don't you dare. Do you think I'm so shallow that your legs matter more than your heart? Do you think I'd turn away from someone I cared about just because they need help instead of offering it? He looked startled by my outburst. Ellen, I loved you, Eddie, I said, tears spilling over. Not your dreams of wealth, not your grand plans. I loved the boy who picked dandelions for me because roses were too expensive. The boy who held me when I cried about my dad's gambling. The boy who believed in dreams so fiercely that I believed in them too. My voice broke. 47 years of buried emotions pouring out like a river through a cracked dam. And if that boy is still in there, everything else is just noise. Edward reached for my hand, and this time I let him take it. His fingers were thinner now, marked with age, but his touch still sent a spark through me. He's still here, he said quietly, buried under years of regret and bitterness, but still here. The question is, what do we do now? I looked around the sunroom, at the opulent life he'd built. Then I met his eyes, searching for an answer I'd been too afraid to voice. Are you really happy, Eddie? I asked. Truly happy? He was quiet for a long moment. I was successful, respected, with more money than I could ever spend. But happy? Not since the day I left you at that bus station. Then maybe, I said carefully, my heart pounding, it's time we stop punishing ourselves for choices we made when we were young. Maybe it's time to see what we could build together now. Edward brought my hand to his lips, kissing it gently. Would you be willing to try, Ellen? Not as my caregiver, but as whatever we could be to each other. I thought of Clara, of the cold house where I was no longer welcome, of the lonely apartment I'd imagined renting, spending my final years alone. Then I looked at the man who'd loved me for nearly 5 decades, even from afar. Yes, I whispered. I'd like to try. But even as the words left my lips, I knew it wouldn't be easy. Clara would have something to say about this, and it wouldn't be kind. My daughter never approved of anything that shifted focus from her own needs, and she'd hate the idea of her mother finding love again. The thought of her reaction twisted my stomach. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe second chances weren't out of reach. 3 weeks later, over dinner in the cozy dining nook we'd started using instead of the grand dining room, Edward spoke again. Ellen, I'd like you to move into the master wing, not as my assistant, but as my partner. The word partner felt strange, weighty, more meaningful than employee, yet not as heavy as the promises we'd made in our youth. I set down my fork. My appetite gone. Eddie, there's something you need to know about Clara. His face grew serious. What about her? She doesn't know who you are, I said. When she found this job for me, she saw a paycheck, a way to get me out of her house. She has no idea about our past. Edward nodded slowly. And you think she'll object to us? I gave a bitter laugh. Clara threw me out 3 weeks after James's funeral. She cares about 2 things, her own comfort and other people's money. When she learns I'm here as more than hired help, she'll assume I'm after your fortune. Are you? He asked quietly. The question stung, sharp as a blade. How can you even ask that? 47 years is a long time, Ellen, he said, his voice steady but pained. People change, and my wealth. He gestured at the elegant room. It changes how people see me. I stood, hurt slicing through me. If that's what you think of me, maybe this was a mistake. Sit down, please, he said, his tone gentle but firm. I had to ask. I've been hurt before by people who claimed to love me, but loved my money more. I needed to hear it from you. I stayed standing, arms crossed. You shouldn't need me to say it. You should know. You're right, he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. Deep down, I do. But when you have this much, you question everyone, even those you love most. My anger softened, replaced by sadness. Is that how you've lived all these years? Not trusting anyone? Pretty much, he said, looking at his hands. It's lonely, but it felt safer than being hurt again. I sat back down, studying the lines around his eyes, the way his mouth curved downward. This was what a life without love had done to him. Turned him into a man who doubted even the truest feelings. For the record, I said, my voice steady, I don't want your money. I'd rather you give every cent to charity if it makes you happy. I have my social security and a small pension from the clinic where I worked before Clara was born, I said, meeting Edward's gaze. It's not much, but I've survived on less. Relief softened his features. I'm sorry I had to ask, Ellen. Don't apologize, I said firmly. Just don't ask again. I picked up my fork, taking a bite of the grilled chicken Margaret had prepared. Now, about Clara. When she finds out about us, she's going to make trouble. You need to be ready. Edward's expression hardened. What kind of trouble? She'll question your intentions, maybe threaten legal action, claim I'm taking advantage of you. She might even try to have me kicked out of here. Let her try, he said, his voice carrying the steel that had built his fortune. This is my home, Ellen. No one tells me who I can invite to live in it. I wished I shared his confidence, but I knew Clara too well. She could be relentless when she felt threatened, and this would threaten her sense of control. My phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. Clara's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach twisted. Speak of the devil, I murmured, showing Edward the display. Answer it, he said. Let's face this now. I swiped to accept. Hello, Clara. Mom, she said, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. I just had a fascinating chat with Mrs. Larson from the Neighborhood Watch. She saw you at the farmer's market with some man in a wheelchair, looking awfully close. I closed my eyes. In a town this small, of course someone would notice. Edward and I had gone to the market yesterday, where he'd insisted on buying fresh berries for a pie I'd mentioned loving as a girl. To an onlooker, we must have seemed more than employer and employee. His name is Edward Carter, I said carefully. He's the man I work for. Work for or work over? Clara's tone dripped with accusation. Mrs. Larson said you two looked far too cozy for a professional arrangement. Edward gestured for the phone, but I shook my head. This was my fight. Clara, I'm 68 years old. I think I can behave appropriately. Are you sleeping with him? Her bluntness hit like a slap. That's none of your business, I said, my voice sharp. It is if you're embarrassing our family. Dad's barely been gone 2 months, and you're already chasing the first rich man who looks your way. Anger surged through me, hot and fierce. How dare you? I grieved for your father, Clara, but I'm not dead. I'm allowed to have a life. A life? Clara's laugh was cold. Is that what we're calling gold digging now? Edward's face darkened, and he gestured more insistently for the phone. This time I handed it over. Miss Harper, he said, his voice icy. This is Edward Carter. There are some things you need to understand. I heard Clara's stunned silence. Then her tone shifted, suddenly polite. Mr. Carter, I didn't realize you were there. Clearly, he said. Listen carefully, because I'll only say this once. Your mother is not a gold digger. She's not embarrassing anyone, and she's certainly not chasing me. If anything, I'm the one pursuing her. Sir, there must be a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Edward cut in, is your belief that you have any say in your mother's personal life. She's a grown woman who can choose who she spends her time with. But she's vulnerable, Clara said, her voice softening with false concern. She's grieving, and she might not be thinking straight. Your mother is one of the strongest, sharpest women I've ever met, Edward said. The fact that you can't see that says more about you than her. Silence stretched across the line. When Clara spoke again, her tone was colder, more calculated. Mr. Carter, I'm just concerned for my mother. She's been through a lot, and I want to ensure she's not being taken advantage of. The only person who's taken advantage of her recently, Edward said quietly, is you. Another pause. Then Clara's voice, sharp as frost. I'd like to meet with you, Mr. Carter, to discuss this properly. Edward glanced at me, eyebrows raised. I nodded reluctantly. Better to face her now than let her scheme in private. Fine, he said. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Clara hung up without a goodbye. Edward handed me the phone, his jaw tight. Well, that went about as expected. She's going to try to turn you against me, I said, sinking into my chair, exhausted. She'll make it sound like I manipulated you, like I planned this. Let her try, Edward said, taking my hand. I didn't build this life by letting others dictate who I care about. Clara doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is losing you again. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, dreading the next day's showdown. I knew Clara would come armed with arguments to drive a wedge between Edward and me. She'd paint me as a desperate widow preying on a lonely, wealthy man, questioning my motives, my timing, my right to find happiness again. But Edward's words echoed in my mind. The only thing that scares me is losing you again. I clung to them, hoping they'd hold true. Clara arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, stepping out of her car in a tailored navy blazer, looking more like she was heading to a boardroom than visiting her mother. From the window, I watched her smooth her skirt and check her reflection in the side mirror. Her movements deliberate, like a general preparing for battle. Edward had insisted we meet in his study, not the cozy sitting room. If she wants to treat this like a negotiation, he'd said, we'll meet her on those terms. Margaret showed Clara in, and my stomach twisted as her eyes swept the room, taking in the sleek furniture, the abstract art, the polished desk that probably cost more than most people's homes. I could almost see her calculating the wealth around her. Mr. Carter, Clara said, extending her hand with polished grace. Thank you for meeting with me. Edward shook her hand briefly, his face unreadable. Miss Harper, please sit. Clara settled into the leather chair across from his desk, crossing her legs and folding her hands with the poise of the real estate agent she was. Only I noticed the tension in her jaw, the slight tremble in her fingers. I'm here out of concern for my mother, she began, her voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. She's been through a lot, and I'm worried she's making choices driven by emotion, not reason. And what choices are those? Edward asked, his tone even. Clara glanced at me, then back at him. This living arrangement. For one, it's unusual for a caregiver to move into the employer's private quarters. It raises questions about the nature of your relationship. What kind of questions? Edward's voice stayed calm, but I heard the edge beneath it. Questions about boundaries, professional conduct. Clara said, leaning forward. Mr. Carter, I'm sure you're a fine man, but my mother is vulnerable. She's grieving, financially unstable, and she might be mistaking gratitude for something else. Heat rose in my cheeks. Clara, that's enough. It's fine, Ellen, Edward said, his eyes fixed on Clara. I'd like to hear what Miss Harper has to say. Clara shot me a warning look, her confidence returning as she prepared to lay out her case. I'm saying my mother has always been too trusting, Clara said, her voice coated with false concern. She sees the good in people, sometimes to her own detriment. In her grief, she might not be thinking clearly about what this situation means. And what does it mean exactly? Edward asked, his tone deceptively mild. Clara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. There's the obvious concern about appearances, a widow moving in with a wealthy man so soon after her husband's death. It doesn't look good. And then there's the question of what happens when this ends. Will my mother be left with nothing, forced to start over again? Edward leaned back in his wheelchair, fingers steepled. Interesting points, Miss Harper. What do you think is best for your mother? Clara's face lit up, sensing an opening. She should come home, to her family, where she can grieve properly and make sound decisions about her future. Home, Edward said, his voice low. You mean the house you inherited from your father, the one you told her to leave? Clara flushed, shifting uncomfortably. That was a misunderstanding. I was grieving. 2. Of course she's welcome in my home. For how long? Edward pressed. Until you decide she's a burden again? Until you need more space for your own family? Clara's polished mask slipped, revealing a flash of calculation. Mr. Carter, you don't understand family dynamics. Oh, I understand perfectly, Edward said, his voice sharp as a blade. I understand you threw your mother out 3 weeks after her husband's funeral. You gave her an ultimatum, work or live on the street. And now you're here because you've realized she's found something better than what you offered. That's not, Clara stammered. I was helping her be independent. By making her homeless? Edward's tone was icy. She has Social Security, $800 a month. Do you know the average rent around here, Miss Harper? Clara's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish out of water. $1,200, Edward continued. For a one-bedroom in a decent area, your mother would be $400 short every month, just for rent. That's not counting food, utilities, or medical costs. She could have found something cheaper, Clara said weakly. Where? In what neighborhood? Edward's voice was relentless. You were fine letting your 68-year-old mother live in poverty to avoid inconveniencing yourself? I watched, torn between satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction that someone was finally calling Clara out. Sorrow that it wasn't her own conscience speaking. She's always been high maintenance, Clara snapped, her composure crumbling. Always expecting everyone to take care of her. High maintenance? I couldn't stay silent. Clara, I worked 2 jobs to pay for your college. I cared for your father through 6 years of cancer without complaint. I watched your kids every weekend for free, and I never asked you for anything except a place to mourn my husband. You were smothering me, Clara exploded, her mask gone. Always hovering, always helping, always making me feel guilty for living my own life. So you threw me out, I said quietly. I gave you a chance to stand on your own. The silence was heavy, pressing down on us. Edward looked at Clara with cold disgust, and she shrank back in her chair. Miss Harper, he said, I think we're done here. Wait, Clara said, her voice desperate. You don't know what you're getting into. My mother, she'll want marriage, security, legal protections. She's not just looking for companionship. And if she is, Edward said, unfazed. What if I want to give her those things? Clara froze. What are you saying? Edward pulled a small velvet box from his desk, the same one holding the silver ring from our youth. Your mother and I have a history that goes back before your father, before you, before everything you think you know about her. We loved each other deeply. Circumstances tore us apart, but they didn't erase what we felt. Now, 47 years later, we have a chance to see if that love can endure. Marriage? Clara's voice was barely audible. I'm talking about living the life we were meant to, Edward said. Whether that's marriage or something else is our decision, not yours. Clara turned to me, her eyes blazing. This is why you took this job, isn't it? You knew who he was. You planned this. No, I said firmly. I had no idea Eddie was here when I applied. I thought he was gone, married, dead, or halfway across the world. Finding him here, in that wheelchair, was the last thing I expected. Eddie? Clara spat the name like poison. You call him Eddie? That's my name, Edward said calmly. Edward is for business. Eddie is for the people I love. Clara stood, her chair scraping the floor. This is ridiculous. You think you can just pick up where you left off 47 years ago, erase a lifetime? We're not erasing anything, I said. We're building something new from what's left. What about Dad? Clara's voice cracked. What about your marriage, our family? Your father was a good man, and I loved him, I said. But Eddie was my first love. Some things, they never truly fade. He's using you, Mom, Clara said, her voice trembling with panic. He's lonely, disabled, and you're convenient. When he's done playing house, you'll be out on the street. Enough, Edward snapped, his voice like a whip. You will not speak about your mother that way in my home. Your home? Clara laughed bitterly. Yes, let's talk about your money, your power. That's what this is about, isn't it? Edward opened his desk drawer again, pulling out a thick legal document. Since you're so worried about money, you should know I've updated my will. Everything goes to charity. The children's hospital, the community center, the animal shelter. Your mother won't inherit a cent. Clara's face paled as she stared at the document. You what? I told him to do it, I said quietly. I don't want his money, Clara. I never did. I want him. Something in Clara's expression broke, like a dam giving way. For a moment, I saw the scared little girl who used to cling to me during storms. But then her mask snapped back, colder than ever. Fine, she said, her voice like ice. Throw your life away on some fantasy from 50 years ago. But don't come to me when it falls apart. I won't be here to pick up the pieces. She stormed out, the door slamming behind her, rattling the windows. Edward and I sat in silence, listening to her car peel away. Finally, he took my hand, his grip steady. Are you okay? I tested the question, probing my heart like a tender bruise. My daughter had just walked out, accusing me of betrayal and greed, vowing never to return. Yet for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I think I am. 6 months after Clara's confrontation, I stood in the sunroom where Edward and I had first admitted our past, the morning light catching the simple gold band on my finger. It wasn't the dazzling diamond Eddie had once promised, but it was perfect, a choice made by the people we'd become, not the dreams of our youth. We'd married quietly 3 weeks ago, with only Margaret and Edward's lawyer as witnesses in the rose garden. It wasn't the grand wedding I'd imagined at 20, but it was ours, two souls reunited, vowing to cherish whatever time we had left. "Mrs. Carter," Margaret said, stepping into the sunroom with a rare smile softening her usual briskness. "There's someone at the door asking for you." My heart tightened. I'd been bracing for this since our wedding announcement ran in the local paper. Clara had stayed silent since storming out of Edward's study. But in a town this small, news spread fast. "Who is it?" I asked, though I knew. "Your daughter, ma'am. She seems upset." I found Edward in his study, reviewing reports for his charity foundation. He looked up, reading my tension. "She's here," I said. He set his papers down and wheeled around. "Do you want me to handle it?" "No, she's my daughter. This is my conversation." I smoothed my skirt, steadying myself. "But I'd like you to be there if you don't mind." "Of course." We found Clara in the formal living room, perched on a plush sofa, looking ready to bolt. She'd lost weight, her face drawn with dark circles makeup couldn't hide. "Clara," I said evenly. "Mom," she replied, standing and crossing her arms. "Congratulations on your marriage. I heard it was nice." "It was," I said, sitting across from her as Edward positioned his wheelchair beside me. "Simple, but perfect." Clara's eyes flicked to our joined hands, to the matching gold bands. "You really married him?" "I did," I said firmly. "For better or worse, in sickness and health." Her laugh was sharp, almost a sob. "I thought you'd come back when the excitement faded, when you realized what you'd given up. I thought you'd come home." "This is my home now," I said, squeezing Edward's hand. "With him." She glared at Edward, resentment flashing. "With a man you barely know anymore." "I know him better than you think," I said. "And I know myself better than I did 6 months ago." Clara stared at the floor, then looked up, tears shimmering. "I went through Dad's papers after you left. I found love letters from a woman named Linda, dated 2 years before he died." The words hit like a stone in still water. James, my steady James, had been unfaithful while I cared for him through his illness. Edward's grip tightened, grounding me. "I'm sorry," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I thought you should know your marriage wasn't as perfect as I believed." I closed my eyes, feeling relief where pain should have been. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "You're not angry?" she asked, surprised. "Sad, disappointed, but not angry," I said. "Your father was a good man who made mistakes. That doesn't erase our good years, but it means I don't owe my life to his memory." Clara's tears fell freely. "I was so jealous, Mom. Angry that you could move on, be happy. I couldn't understand how you could let go of Dad." "I didn't let go," I said. "I'll always carry him, but I can't stay trapped in grief." "I made it worse," Clara whispered. "I was hurt about Dad's affair, angry. I blamed you for not being enough, then for needing me when I was falling apart." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, moving to sit beside her. "You should have told me." "How could I tell you he betrayed you?" she said. "That your marriage was flawed?" "It wasn't all flawed," I said gently. "The early years were real. Our love was real. And you're the best thing from that marriage." Clara leaned into me, my daughter again, not a stranger. "I've been awful. Can you forgive me?" I glanced at Edward, who nodded, his eyes warm. "I forgive you," I said. "But if you want to be part of my life, you need to respect my marriage, my husband, and my right to be happy." Clara looked between us, noticing how Edward's gaze softened, how my hand sought his. Something in her expression shifted, like a cloud parting. "I can see it," she said, almost in wonder. "The way you look at each other, it's like you're the only two people in the world." "Sometimes it feels that way," I admitted. "Are you happy, Mom? Truly happy?" she asked. I thought of our quiet mornings, reading in the sunroom, Edward picking dandelions from the garden because he remembered they were my favorite. The peace of falling asleep beside him. "Yes," I said, "I'm happy." Clara nodded, standing. "Then I need to learn to be happy for you. I want to try, Mom. I want to be part of your life, to know Edward as your husband, not my boss." I want to make up for the months I wasted being angry and cruel. I stood and hugged her, truly hugged her, for the first time since James's funeral. I'd like that very much. As Clara pulled back, she glanced around the elegant room, then at me. This is really your home now. It is. And you're really Mrs. Carter? I am, she smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from her in over a year. It'll take getting used to, but you deserve this, Mom. To be loved, cherished, maybe even spoiled a little. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. After Clara left, promising to call and bring her kids to meet their new step-grandfather, Edward and I sat in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink. Do you think she means it? I asked. About rebuilding? She's her mother's daughter, Edward said, stronger and more forgiving than she knows. I leaned back, the last tension easing from my shoulders. Thank you, Eddie, for fighting for us, for not giving up when it got messy. He kissed my hand softly. Thank you for taking a chance on an old love with an older man, for seeing past the wheelchair and the walls I'd built. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people in our 70s, starting over like kids. The best kind, he said. The kind that knows how precious love is and doesn't take it for granted. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, I reflected on the journey that brought me here. The pain of losing James, the sting of Clara's rejection, the fear of starting over with nothing. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you've been searching for. Sometimes the love you thought was gone forever has been waiting, patient and true, for you to come home. So what about you? If you were in my shoes, would you take a chance on a love from your past? Have you ever faced a choice that changed everything? Drop your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your stories. And check out 2 other tales on this channel that'll surprise you as much as mine did. Thanks for joining me on this journey.